Good morning, everyone. I see that we've got some workshop attendees starting to fill up our online room. So we are just getting this room nice and filled, waiting until 12 o'clock to get started. But just know this is the Zoom webinar format. So you will be muted during the presentation, and you will also not have any video sharing. So we can't see you, you can see us, and you can see the presentation. If you have any issues as you get started, please go ahead and use the chat function. You'll see if you scroll down to the bottom of your screen, there's a few options. There's one that says chat, and you can send a direct chat straight to me, and I can help get you set up with anything that you might need. Good afternoon, officially, everyone. Looks like we still have some more folks logging in, so we're going to give 1 or 2 more minutes to let people get in here and get settled, and then we will get started. All right, good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here, and thanks for everyone who's here now and is on time. We are so excited to offer this workshop to you. So my name is Christy Lovelace. I am with the City of Shoreline, and I run our city's Soak It Up Rain Garden and Native Vegetation Landscape Rebate Program. This rebate program offers up to $2,000 in an incentive to try to get these gardens installed throughout the city on private property. I look forward to sharing more about that rebate program with you in just a little bit here, but for today, really the purpose of this workshop is to explain a bit more about these types of gardens and then also provide you with the skills and knowledge that you need to get started in both designing these gardens and putting them into the ground, building them. And so I am so excited to have Snohomish Conservation District here today. They will be leading the workshop. We've got Derek Hahn and David Jackson from Snohomish Conservation District. They have tons of experience, not only putting rain gardens and native vegetation landscaping into the ground themselves, building and designing these, but also in teaching these types of workshops for other nearby jurisdictions as well. So I'm really excited to put you in their hands and have them lead us forward in this workshop. Just a few housekeeping notes before we get started. So as we go through the presentation, it's totally natural to have questions, and we want to make sure that we're getting those questions answered. The best way to do this is if you take your mouse and you scroll down to the bottom of your screen, you'll see there is a Q&A button. If you click on that Q&A button, you can enter your question, and we will have our presenters who are going to be helping us to answer those questions as we go through. And if there's a question that's really relevant to a broad group, they think it's worth everybody hearing the answer to, they'll go ahead and answer those questions as well. So they'll take some time to ask for questions throughout the presentation. So go ahead and use that Q&A function to do that. At the very end of the presentation, we will have the opportunity to ask questions. So you can have the opportunity to get unmuted. You can use down at the bottom, we'll go over this again when we get there, but there's also a raise hand function. So at the end of the presentation, you can use that, but throughout the presentation, it'll probably be best to use the Q&A function. If you run into any issues during this presentation, I see that we've already got some questions going in the chat, but you can reach out to me. So again, if you scroll down to the bottom, there's a chat box, and you can look my name up and you can send me a message if there's any issues that you're facing, and I can help get you sorted out. And just so everybody knows, you can see this presentation is being recorded. We hope to share this out to other people who are interested in this program and also offer it to you if there's any portion that you want to go back and look at one more time. And I think that is it for me. So without any further ado, go ahead and take it away, Derek and David.
Thank you. Welcome, everybody. My name is Derek Hahn. I'm a civil engineer with the Snohomish Conservation District. I've been working with the Conservation District for 10 years, doing mostly rain garden designs and installations on private property. So doing what you guys are possibly thinking about doing. During my time, I probably put in about 300 different installations. So I've been doing this for a while. This is just kind of a presentation of the things that I've learned through the process. We're also going to be going through some of the things from the Rain Garden Handbook, which I highly recommend to anybody who's thinking about putting in a rain garden. Yeah, please feel free to ask questions as we go. David's going to take over in a little bit. He's my program manager, but also really good with plants. So I'm going to let him take the majority of the plant topics. And let's just get into it. So the first thing is we're just going to do a basic intro of what the stormwater problem is, how we can help fix that problem with rain gardens, and then we're going to get into native vegetation and landscaping, and then we're going to do a bit of a deeper dive after that into some of the more nuanced details. So first thing, stormwater is the #1 source of pollution in Western Washington. And not only does it cause pollution, but it causes other issues like flooding and erosion. We just get so much rain around here that all of the water rushes out of the flows out of the sky, hits all of our roads and buildings, and picks up things like oils and heavy metals and trash and nutrients and fertilizers, and washes them all downstream as quickly as it can and eventually ends up in the Puget Sound, which causes all kinds of problems. So that is the main thing that we're going to be addressing in this intro. The issue is that 100 years ago, basically everything in Western Washington looked like this. It was really heavily vegetated. We had lots of rain. There's multiple layers of vegetation. The native ground in this area was really, really soft. It had lots of organics in it. It had it was kind of acted like a sponge, and that water that fell on it soaked into it and took a very, very long time to move to the nearest stream. If we go to this slide, this kind of gives you an idea of how much water, how water acts in 100 years ago, what happened. So historically, 50% of the water that fell out of the sky went right back up into the sky. And this is called evapotranspiration. And that's for a number of reasons. One is a water drop would fall and hit a leaf, and then it would roll off and hit another leaf, and then roll off and hit another leaf and go all the way down the tree until it hit the ground. And every time it hit a leaf, a little bit of that water evaporates back up in the atmosphere. And the other thing is that trees just take up a lot of the water, and they soak it in, and then they breathe it back out into the atmosphere. So fully half of the water that falls out of the sky in a forested condition goes straight back up, and we don't have to deal with it. And then of the water that does fall into and then 35% of the water that comes out of the sky in a forested condition just soaks into the soil, and it saturates the soil during the winter, and then during the summer it evaporates that back out. So only about 15% of the water in a forested condition actually makes its way running downstream and then gets to like a local creek or a local stream or something like that. So very little of it. We call that forested condition pervious. So that's an important vocabulary word for you guys. Pervious just means water soaks into it. It's like a sponge. So we soak it in is the name of this program. That's the reason, is that we want all of our surfaces to act much more like a sponge or like a pervious surface than what they act like normally. So this is what our environment looks like now. This is the opposite of a forested condition. This is a great big parking lot. And basically what we've done in development is we've come in with our machines and we've stripped all the good soil and all the vegetation off of the site and turned it into a hard surface that water will not flow through. So when water falls out of the sky, very little of it goes back up into the air as evapotranspiration. There's just one initial drop from the rain hitting the pavement, and some of that water evaporates, but the rest of it basically just stays there. And then also very little of it has any opportunity to encounter any soil that has any infiltration capacity. So it soaks in there, or so it doesn't soak in there. So almost all of the water ends up as what we call runoff. And that's water that's flowing along the edge of the pavement and the edges of houses and buildings and that type of thing, and goes straight into the creek with no filtration and no detention time at all. Those surfaces are called impervious. So classic examples of impervious surfaces are roads and driveways and sidewalks and buildings, and basically everything that we build that keeps water off of it. So this causes all kinds of issues. One issue is that it causes flooding. Because all of the water is trying to get to the same spot at the same time and it's moving very quickly, everything backs up. It's kind of like getting on I-5. If everybody's trying to get on I-5 at the same time, all of the on-ramps back up. Stormwater is the same way. Soil erosion. So because the water is moving so fast, it tends to pick up little particles of dirt as it moves and wash them downstream. And then when that happens, we cut our streams straighter and straighter and deeper until we start having stability issues on some of the banks of our creeks, and houses start to fall in because so much soil has been washed downstream. Pollution is another really big issue again. So all of those oils and heavy metals and fertilizers and organics and trash just get caught up in the water, and then they wash to the nearest catch basin, and then they end up flowing downstream to our creeks. And we also have an issue with less groundwater. Because there's less opportunity for that water to fall out of the sky and get into the soil, we end up mining our aquifers around here. So we get a lot of people around here get their water straight out of the ground from aquifers. And if we're taking more water out than we're putting back in, eventually we're going to run out of water that we can pull out of those wells. And impervious areas contribute to reducing the amount of water that we can infiltrate into those aquifers. So how do we fix it? Well, first, let's see, does anybody have any questions on that part of it before I move on to what the potential solution would be? Good, just a second. I see one notice in the Q&A. Oh.
Yeah, we're in.
Okay, I'll just move on then. So there are lots of solutions to the stormwater problem, but the one that we're going to talk about today is called a rain garden. And a rain garden is really pretty simple. Basically, all you're doing is you're making an artificial forest in your yard. So all of those things that we talked about, how wonderful a forest is for stormwater, we're basically taking a miniature version of that and putting it onto your property. So the first thing we do is we dig a great big hole. We do this because most people's native soil, the soil that's in their yard, is just not very permeable. So water doesn't go through it very well. It doesn't do a very good job of cleaning any pollutants out of it. So we get all of that soil that's really not very good out. And then the next thing we do, is we fill it back in. This soil is called bioretention soil. It's a really good product. We'll talk about the details of this more in the second half, but basically it's about 60% sand and 40% compost. And the sand is there so that the water can infiltrate through it pretty quickly, but the organics are there to, one, make it not go too fast, but also keep plants alive. And it acts as a really good host for microbes to do processing on things like heavy metals and make them inert. And it also helps with absorption. So some of those heavy metals or oils will actually suck into the particles of the organics. This soil product is really, really good. I use it all over my house, even in places that are not for rain gardens. It's been designed very meticulously. I love it. And you can see how dark it is. And the plants that you put in here really, really like it. Once we have that, we put a mulch layer over the top of it. Now this occurs in a forest too. You have the native soils underneath, but then you also have a mulch layer on the top from things like leaves and branches constantly falling onto the soil from the nearby plants. And so this is another thing that we're trying to replicate in terms of making a miniature forest for a rain garden. We put the mulch down for a number of reasons. One is that bioretention soil we put underneath is pretty sensitive to compaction. We don't want to be walking over it all the time. And if it becomes compact, it won't infiltrate as fast. And so this makes a mat over the top. So you can walk over the top of it and you don't have to worry about compaction. Water goes through it readily, but in the summer months, it does a good job of insulating it so the water doesn't evaporate too quickly. And then really the main purpose for it is it does a really, really good job of keeping weeds down. This product that we use is 100% wood, and weeds just have a really hard time finding a spot to sprout. And if they do sprout, they come out of the ground really easy because that top layer is so loose. And then once that's done, the next thing we do is we just put in plants. Especially in residential conditions, we like to use kind of smaller plants because the plants in these situations really like this soil, and they'll get really big. So we like to use a lot of grasses in emergence, maybe a bush or two here or there to provide an accent piece, but we don't want it to get too large. And they look really nice. That's the goal. The goal for us is for this to act as a mitigation for stormwater. But one of the benefits is these systems really look really, really nice when they're put in, and you can make them look as decorative as you want. I will say that the intention of the rain garden is not to hold water for very long. If we get a big rain event, there may be standing water in it for hopefully not more than like 10 or 12 hours, but definitely less than 72 hours. But then it'll draw down. So this is not a pond. You're not going to see standing water in it all the time. The idea is that we want that water to go down into the soil as much as possible. So here's a typical section of what rain gardens look like. So you can see we just dug a big hole. We backfilled it with that bioretention soil. We need a safe way to get water in, and a safe way to get, if the whole system gets full, we need a safe place to put the water or direct the water, and we call that an overflow. So the inlet is usually just a pipe inlet, and it either goes from the downspout and inlets into the rain garden. Alternatively, if you have like a driveway or like a paved surface, we usually just put it down the rain garden downstream of that driveway and try to direct the water so that it flows into the rain garden. And then for the overflow pad, we usually just put a rock pad around the low end of the rain garden, and so that if it does overflow, we know where that water is going to go. And we want to try to direct that over your yard if we can, and not put it directly back into the street. This is an example of what it looks like. This is what that pipe looks like. So there's the downspout in the back, and you can see it goes underground and then outlets to that river rock pad. And we put the river rock pad there because the soils and the mulch are pretty sensitive to erosion. So if you get too much force behind the water, it'll wash the soils and the mulch away. So the rock pad is there to absorb some of that energy and keep things from moving around too much. In terms of where we can place a rain garden, we need to make sure that it's not too close to certain things. So we want to be 10 feet from buildings because we are infiltrating water. We don't want to potentially get a bunch of water under your crawl space. So 10 feet away from the house is a good rule. 5 feet from utilities. One thing that you will need to do when you do the design for this rain garden is figure out where your utilities are, your water and sewer and that type of thing. And we use 5 feet as a setback because when you call 811 and they come out and mark the utilities for you, they only have 5 feet of confidence either direction of that line. And so from a liability standpoint, they tell you 5 feet. So that's where that number came from. You need to be 50 feet from a steep slope. Steep slope would be 10% or more. And then we want to stay outside of the crowns of trees if we can. So if you kind of go and look up at a tree and you can kind of see the outer edges of the branches and you draw a plane straight down, that's where we want to stay out of, because inside of that are the really sensitive parts of the roots. And we don't want to try and kill a tree by putting in a rain garden. So when we do plans for people at the Conservation District, this is typically what we do. I just go on Google Maps and I take an aerial photo, and then I go in and I just draw out the size of everything. This is a really good exercise for anybody that's doing a plan. Just go get on Google Maps, find a nice aerial of your property looking down, and then just start drawing out the shapes of where you want stuff to go. So I think that's a good place to pause. That's just a real brief intro. We're going to go into a lot more depth later on in the second part of this. But are there any questions before I hand it over to David and he goes over native landscape?
Yeah, Derek, we have one from Bevan Horn, who's interested in how to make a rain garden or some kind of retention bioinfiltration work on a very hilly yard or a yard that is on a very steep hill.
Yeah, I guess it depends on how steep it is. And we have done at the Conservation District, we have done a number of those on steeper areas. We do what's called a terraced garden, where we'll have one cell that overflows to the next one. However, you'll have to discuss that with Christy in terms of if that will fit the goals of their project. It could be that if you're just on too steep of a slope, that this may not be the best solution for you, and you may just want to do a native landscaping area instead. But that's something that you can talk to Christy about, and she can kind of help you decide what would be most appropriate for that spot.
Natasha Vegors also wants to know what is the best disposal method of the soil taken out of the garden?
That's a good question. Yeah, we'll cover more of that on the second one. But I mean, mostly what we end up doing is getting on Craigslist and putting an advertisement for free fill, because it's amazing how many people are always looking for dirt. And then you don't have to pay to get rid of it. If you have to pay to dispose of the soil, it can be actually quite expensive. And it can be so easy to get rid of. So there is a little bit of creativity, but stay around for the second part of the presentation and we'll get into the details on that. So David, you ready?
Yeah, let's do it. So we're going to talk about native vegetation landscaping, and we're going to talk about this in two contexts. One, the native vegetation landscaping, which is explicitly part of the program, and two, the parts of the native plantings that go into a rain garden itself. So native vegetation landscaping focuses on three specific things. You're either replacing your lawn, you're replacing hardscape, or you are replacing an area that is currently dominated by invasives. If it's the lawn replacement, there are several ways to actually remove your lawn. If it's hardscape replacement, you need to actually be taking up things like a patio or a walkway or part of your driveway. And if it's invasive removal, you need to follow certain protocols to actually remove the invasives and then replant with native plants. So talking for a second about why natives are helpful, why they work. They are lower intensity in terms of maintenance. They are adapted to our climate, our soils, which makes them easier to care for after they're established. You can see this little small diagram that I have down there. The roots are deeper than a lot of the invasives, and they're also much broader. That is important to us because not only do they go deeper and cause the soil to be able to absorb more water by making essentially small channels with their roots, they also take up more water from the soil and more nutrients, and they bring deeper nutrients up to the topsoil, which allow other plants to survive on the surface, rather than invasives, which tend to bioaccumulate and only give it back up after they are killed. They also provide a number of what we sometimes call co-benefits. These are critical elements for wildlife, including food, cover, nesting sites, water, and other habitat benefits. And of course, native species, any sort of native planting, and the local wildlife, be those insects or critters or birds, are completely linked, and it is important to help those systems support each other. So one part of this is tilling and amending soil. The soil that we have right now, especially after putting in turf lawns, tends to be very compacted. Compacted soil does not allow for water to infiltrate as readily. So part of this program is tilling the soil down to 8 inches, amending for about 4 inches, and then mulching for another 3 to 4 inches. We do this to support the plants with the amendment, but also to scrape and break up that 8-inch layer of topsoil to allow water to filter in more quickly. And mulching has a number of benefits, including long-term nutrification, but also weed suppression and ease of maintenance. So natives in water, they work in a few different ways. There's filter strips, which are essentially just large strips that intercept water while they're in the process of being discharged. There's also things called flood gardens, which are planted in wet spots. As Derek mentioned, rain gardens work best in drier areas. So you want the water to be infiltrating quickly. So if you have a wet area and you think, well, what can I do with this? You can amend it and plant some natives there. They will take the water up and help mitigate that. This is true for both year-round and seasonal wet spots. As I mentioned earlier, these plants are adapted to our drought flood cycle. So they are very good at handling times without water and handling times with lots of water. Derek mentioned earlier the idea of evapotranspiration. And I want to talk just for a second about evapotranspiration. Evapotranspiration is actually a combination of 2 activities, evaporation and transpiration. Evaporation, as we all know, is just water being released into the air. Transpiration is actually part of photosynthesis. It's when the plants essentially exude water vapor while they are also exuding oxygen or taking carbon dioxide. This happens pretty constantly, and it means that the plants are constantly losing water, which is why plants constantly need to be watered. But both transpiration and evaporation results in water vapor in the air. So we kind of lump them together. But the important part is that it is more effective and more efficient than simple evaporation or infiltration. Instead, you have both infiltration through the garden and evapotranspiration going on through the plants, as well as water stored in the body, which makes overall less water. There are several ways to choose natives. This is one of those things where if you get 6 botanists in a room, you'll get 7 opinions. The 5 that I wanted to highlight are the Rain Garden Handbook for Western Washington, which I believe you all have, and has a very good plant list in the back. Later on in the Introduction to Design, I'm going to be talking a little bit about that list and giving you some sort of caveats and addendums to it. WSU wrote an amazing book called Grow Your Own Native Landscape that is actually taught for environmental horticulture and restoration ecology at several local colleges. It's a wonderful book. It's online for free. If you're going to try to do any of this, I strongly recommend downloading it. The King County Native Plant Guide is very effective. Great Plant Picks is a really wonderful online resource that has lots of lists. So if you're trying to figure out what to plant underneath, like a conifer, for instance, there's a whole list of just plants that do well under conifers. You can sort plants by their color. You can sort plants by if they like full or partial shade. It's a really, really great website. It has lots of beautiful pictures. So you can kind of figure out what your aesthetic and your style is. And then, of course, local nurseries and gardens, if you can make it out there and talk to those folks, those are folks who know a lot and they can answer a lot of specific questions you may not be able to find answers to online. Example plants and details. So there's a lot of plants for different solutions, like colored wildlife, wet spots. Great Plant Picks has a number of those. There is a list of common plants, a number of common plants that can be used in almost all of these different gardens. You can find example plans online if you're completely lost and you're like, I don't even know where to start. You can find some people and just sort of crib their drawings. We're going to have some photos later on of both before and after the wands. And there is a worksheet to fill out if you are doing this native vegetation landscaping as well. So plants for different solutions. Good color ones. Red twig dogwood. This is a common one. There's a Kelsey version, which is a dwarf version. I strongly recommend that one if you're going to be putting in a rain garden. It's bright red in the winter. It's very hard to kill, very versatile. Common camas and kinnikinick are both kind of unusual colors that you don't normally find here in the Pacific Northwest. If you're looking to kind of stand out, or if you think, gosh, I have a lot of white and yellow, get some common camas in there. A lot of different nurseries will carry it, though I had a hard time getting some over this last summer. If you are looking at a wet area and you're really struggling, Douglas spirea is with the wonderful name Spirea douglasii. Really, really ingenuitive there. They're tall, they're beautiful, wonderful pink, like light pink to dark red color. Don't plant them in a rain garden, but they're really wonderful if you have a wet spot. Juncus scirpus and Campsia species for grasses are clumping grasses. They're also lovely blues to sort of more yellows and have lots of different species. If you're looking to plant for wildlife, blackberry, twinberry, or black twinberry, snowberry, coastal strawberry, any of the Mahonia species are really good ones. They sort of hit the trifecta where they provide food structure and shelter for a lot of different birds and critters. Here's a couple example plans that I mentioned earlier from King County. The link is there, and we'll make sure that you have this link. On the left, you have one that is for wet and sunny, and on the right, you have one for moist and partly shady. If these look overwhelming, they have really good keys. They have a lot of explanation about the plants. I'm just pulling out the images so you can sort of see the level of technicalness that they're working for. But this should hopefully, you know, if you look at one of these and say, oh, well, this is really cool, I really like this, I'm going to go look up this plant. They give you kind of a place to start from. If you start thinking, well, I don't like, you know, I don't like goldenrod, I'm going to take that out. Okay, great. You know, take that out, take camas out, take what, you know, take the hebes out, take whatever you don't like and replace it with something else. These are just kind of a good starting point for people that may be a little bit lost. So I want to ask if we have any questions. I saw a couple get answered, but is there anything about plants that I went through too quickly or that somebody wants some more explanation on? Okay, then I am going to kick it over to Christy to talk about the rebate program.
Great, thank you, David. So I'm really excited to share about the soakitup program rebate program. Next slide, please. So as David and Derek have been sharing, there are two main types of gardens that we offer in this program. It's the rain garden and the native vegetation landscaping. Here are two examples from recent installations in our program. Next slide, please. So for the rain garden, we've talked about what it is a little bit. So it's that shallow depression where we're redirecting water either from our roofs or from other hard surfaces like our driveways into the garden. It's got really absorbent fertile soils and a mix of native plants in there. For our rain gardens, we require at least 50% native plants. And then to keep it nice and healthy and loamy, we top it with woody mulch that breaks down over time. People who are interested in the rain garden are normally interested in it for a few different reasons. So if there is an area of your home that has drainage issues because of a downspout, then sometimes redirecting that water to another area can resolve that specific drainage issues. Rain gardens are also excellent at filtering pollutants from the hardscape, as Derek touched on just a bit. Soil is this awesome cleaner that can filter out many different pollutants. And it's surprising, you can even get pollutants, you know, not only from your driveway, but in terms of our roofs, those can have pollutants that we want to keep out of the waterways as well. So this is especially effective if your home right now is draining into the street, or if you have a connected downspout that is going into the street. They're aesthetically pleasing. It can be a really great way if you're looking to make over your yard. They can be designed to be relatively low maintenance. There's a little bit of work at first to get them established. And then, as David was also mentioning, there's lots of different plant options to meet different goals, including creating a garden that is pollinator or wildlife friendly. Next slide, thank you. So the other option is the native vegetation landscaping. So this also includes some earthwork. It is not simply just planting native plants. In this program, the areas that are eligible are those that have existing hardscape, grassy area, or if the area is covered in invasive species. As part of this program, you remove that existing hardscape grass or the invasive species, and then you're going to be tilling and amending the soil with compost. So we're going to create really nice, light, airy soil that's really healthy and fertile as well. And then we're going to put that 50% native plant mix. So it's at least 50%. Oftentimes people in this program do choose to go closer to 100%, which is excellent. The more natives, the happier we are. And again, we're topping with woody mulch to have that nice long life of a nice aerated soil. So why the native vegetation landscaping? So this can help with drainage issues as well. While we are not redirecting water to these gardens, it can increase the soil capacity. So if you have an area of your lawn that might be just a little bit ponding, or if you have you know, an invasive species section that has a bit of ponding issues, then sometimes we can put these gardens in and it can increase the capacity to hold water and drain that down. So you reduce that ponding. They're aesthetically pleasing. Again, really great way to make over your yard. You can create these as a low maintenance garden. And again, pollinator and wildlife friendly gardens are certainly an option with this as well. So for the soakitup program, all property owners in Shoreline are eligible. So we see commercial community sites. We mostly see residential, but we're open to all property owners. The rebate, you have to have at least 400 square feet to qualify, and the maximum rebate will go up to 800 square feet, and it's $2.50 per square foot. So for the rain garden, what we're measuring is we're measuring the area of water that you are sending to the garden. So if it's your roof, we're looking at the area of your roof that is going to be going through your downspouts and into the garden. And for the native vegetation landscaping, it's a lot simpler. It's just the square footage of the ground that's being converted to that native vegetation landscape. Again, we require 50% natives for both of these gardens. The more, the merrier. And there is a 10-year covenant that comes with these gardens. So when you apply for this program, you are agreeing to maintain these gardens for 10 years and you're not going to remove them. And this is just a way that we're able to use public funds to do work on private property. We consider these to be stormwater facilities, very official, but what you're doing is you're really doing the city a service and the community a service to manage stormwater on your own property. And so we can justify using some funds to help you do that work as long as you're intending to keep it for 10 years. If you're planning on selling your house, that's a very common question. That's totally fine. It sticks with the title of the house, so it would go on to the next homeowners. And then finally, we do have some critical areas throughout shorelines. These are typically stream side areas. And in these areas, projects are limited up to 500 square feet. Your whole property might not be in a critical area. It might just be a portion of it. In these areas, we need to see 100% native species and then just following other guidelines. A lot of people wonder if they're in a critical area, how would they know? And during your application process, I will help you to understand whether you're in a critical area or not. So I can provide that information to you. And finally, how to apply. The first step is to schedule a site visit with me through our online website, the Soakitup website. You can find my contact information. I will also go ahead and put that into the chat box again, but you can send me an email or give me a call and we can schedule a site visit to determine if your property has eligible portions of the yard or the property that would be suited for either a rain garden or for the native vegetation landscape. After this site visit, then that's the first check to see if you're eligible or not. Then you want to submit an application. The application has the fully baked plan of where you plan to place your rain garden or native vegetation landscaping, what plants you hope to include, and the sizing and all of the details that go along with that. It's really important that you submit that application and you receive approval, which I turn those up really quickly before you start any work. Once you receive that approval, then you can go ahead and begin and complete the project. We ask that once you receive that approval that you complete the project within a year, and then you schedule a follow-up inspection with me. I come out to the site and I just make sure that it looks like the application that you submitted and what we agreed on. We put together the covenant, and then after the covenant signing, you receive a rebate check in the mail. So I'm happy to answer any questions related to that. You can feel free to put them into the Q&A. I'll go ahead and take a peek, but I just wanted to show a few examples of some of the native vegetation landscaping and the rain garden projects that we've had throughout Shoreline in the different neighborhoods. So go ahead if you want to spend just a few seconds on each slide, and then you can move it right along. And I see one question here from Melissa, and she's confirming, is the 400 square foot minimum based on the area, such as a roof that will run off into the garden and not the size of the rain garden itself? That's correct. For the rain garden, we are interested in the area that will run off into that rain garden. So the size of the roof or the driveway or any other hardscape that you're sending water from to the rain garden. For the native vegetation landscaping, it is going to be the size of the garden itself. I see another question coming in from Suzanne. Do rain gardens work in rural areas with high water levels? I think I'll kick this one over to Derek and David.
They can work in rural areas for sure. The high water level table can be a bit of an issue. We can usually make rain gardens work in pretty much any scenario, but high water can be a struggle because they can't infiltrate water into water. So it just depends on how high your water table is. But if I'd say if it was shallower than about 3 feet, then we might want to look at another potential solution for that site. Anything less than 3 feet from the surface is probably going to cause a problem. So.
And Carly, I see your question as well. How much do rain gardens typically cost per square foot? We're going to go over budgeting in the next session. We don't really have a per square foot breakdown. There's a number of different factors that go into the cost of a garden, which we will cover next session or in our next half. Similarly, for Camille, how big should the rain garden? I'm guessing that's how big should the rain garden be? It depends on how much roof you're taking up, and we will again be answering that in the next section. And then Michelle Peterson wants to know: can we apply for both rain garden and native vegetation if there is potential?
Yes, Michelle, great question. Thank you for bringing that up. We oftentimes have applicants who opt to do a combination of a rain garden and native landscaping, or some applicants who do multiple rain gardens or multiple native vegetation landscaping beds. Both are perfectly acceptable. We're just looking for that 400 square foot minimum in order to be eligible.
Lynn wants to know, is this program restricted to the shoreline area? It is a city of Shoreline, so I believe so.
If you're outside of if you're in Snohomish County, there's a completely separate program that would be through the Conservation District. So reach out to one of us, but it's going to have some different rules and some different guidance than this program we're talking about specifically.
And I'll take a second to answer something that was asked earlier. Somebody very politely and kindly said, why is Snohomish Conservation District doing this? Aren't we in King County? We have an agreement with King County that we come down on occasion and help them and the municipalities in King County with GSI programs like this. So the only caveat is that we need to be doing it through a municipality or an organization. So you are entitled to all of the help that we can give you as long as you are doing it through the city of Shoreline.
Or you live in Snohomish County.
Or you just live in Snohomish County, correct?
Yes.
In which case you do whatever you want.
All right, do we want to take a break then? Or do we want to just keep going?
No, let's take a break. Let's take, what do you guys think of maybe a 5 or 10 minute break?
Sounds good.
All right, let's come back at 12:55 and we will jump into the next session, which is planning, budgeting, and maintenance. See everyone at about 10. Thank you.
All right, about 1 more minute and then we'll start the next part of the presentation.
Christy, there is a question from Camille in the Q&A that I think you may be suited to answer. And since it is 12:55, let's jump back into it with part 2.
All right.
Thank you,
So,
David. Oh, sorry. Can I answer Camille's question really quickly?
yeah, go ahead. Go for it.
Great, thank you. So Camille's question, she's asking if a resident can apply for this rebate several times and receive the rebate for the rain garden and native vegetation area. So this rebate is a one-time rebate. So we encourage applicants to max out the rebate. So if you know that you're going to be wanting to do multiple projects throughout the yard, to propose all of those at once if possible, because you can only apply for the rebate in one time.
Thank you. All right, so in this part, we're going to get into a lot more detail on what the rain gardens and native planting areas look like. So as we go through this, you'll notice that my graphic here on the right matches that in the handbook. So we're just going to kind of generally follow the rain garden handbook. So if you happen to have a copy of that, you can follow along at home. The first thing we need to figure out when we're doing this is, where does the water go right now? And where can we put a rain garden so that we can just use gravity to get water to the rain garden, and we don't have to try and fuss around with trying to get water to a site that's too high. So there's a couple ways to do this. One is just to walk around your property. What I usually do when I go out and do site visits for people is I go and I pull up the Google aerial map of their house. This is my house here, and you can see from here where the lines are that separate the eaves. So all this water on this side of the house goes this, or on the right side of the house goes east, and on the left side of the house goes west. You can see all of these are broken up into different shapes and triangles, and it's really pretty easy from the shadows to tell what water goes where. So, and you can use, if you use like Google Earth, you can actually get in there and measure the distances of those different sections of your roof and get your square footage pretty simply. Then all you have to do is go figure out where your downspout is on the side of the house and just kind of do some basic calculations in terms of how much area you think is going to each downspout. And that's called the contributing area. So that's surface area that we're measuring of the impervious area. So that's portion of your roof or portion of your driveway. That's called the contributing area. And that's the first number that we start with to try and figure out how big your rain garden needs to be. When we're doing rain garden design, the shape's pretty important. I'm an engineer, so I sometimes personally lean a little bit more towards squares, but we've found that out in the field, when we're implementing these, they look a lot better if they have curves on them. So beans and paisleys and eggs are very common shapes for rain gardens because they have the most number of curves and the most number of nuance, most amount of nuance, and it just makes the space look a lot more natural. And we're really going for a natural look in most of these, less of an engineered look and more of a, this is a miniature forest type of look. So lots of curves are usually pretty good. All right, so this is a bit of an intimidating chart that's in the rain garden handbook, and this will help you decide how big the rain garden needs to be. So you see all these numbers on here, but you can see here in the middle on region 2 under best, that's really the only part that we care about. And so as you read this, Region 2 just means the part of the map of Western Washington that we're located in. Everybody in shoreline is in Region 2. So we don't even have to worry about the stuff. We're going to be designing this to the best case scenario, so we don't have to worry about the good or better columns above. The 2 or 12-inch, the rain garden itself has a depressed area in the middle, so it's lower in elevation in the center than it is in the surrounding yard. And that is called the ponding depth. Most of the time, 95% of the time, you only need about 6 inches of ponding depth in your rain garden. So the vast majority of you are going to be designing to that situation. You can go as deep as 12 inches for a ponding depth. It helps you a little bit with storage capacity. We mostly do that in areas where we really have a lot of water coming off an impervious area and we don't think the rain garden is going to be big enough. But for the vast majority of you, 6 inches is going to be fine. The downside of doing a really deep ponding depth like 12 inches is that especially in a smaller garden, it starts to look a little bit like a crater if it's too deep in the middle. So it will look a little bit more natural if you go a little shallower with the ponding depth, but we also need to make sure that ponding depth is in there. So it needs to be a minimum of 6 inches. And then, so once you've selected that, so let's just go with 6 inches here. You have to figure out how fast your soil infiltrates. So you're going to follow the guide in the rain garden handbook. And that basically is you go out into your yard and you dig a small hole, usually with a post hole digger, down to about 2.5 feet. And then you fill it with water and measure how long it takes that water to fall. And we measure that in inches per hour. So if it falls 2 inches in 2 hours, you have 1 inch per hour of an infiltration rate. And so then you go to this chart and then you look for which percentage you would fall under. So if we were at 1 inch per hour, I would go to the second to the last chart on the end. You can see up above, it says 1.0 inches per hour to 2.49 inches per hour. And then I would go down to region 2 at 6 inches and see that the number 21%. So that means if your soil, your native soils in your yard infiltrate at about 1 inch per hour, that the rain garden needs to be about 21% of the contributing area. So if you had 1,000 square feet of roof, that means your rain garden is going to be 210 square feet in area. I know it's a little bit convoluted. We can help you with this process too if you guys get a little bit lost. This is usually where most people tend to get the most confused and figuring out how to do this part. But there are people out there that can help you through that process. So is there a question on that, just because it is a little bit complicated before I move on?
There is not, but I think that is something that's we can definitely go over in more detail at the end, or we can, but how do we reach you for help? You can contact us through Christy. Our information will be up at the end. We are happy to talk people through that. And Natasha, no, there is not a charge. There is not a charge for helping with sizing.
And pictures are really helpful.
Yes.
So yeah, instead of trying to type out exactly what's going on, sometimes a picture just lets us know exactly.
It is also worth noting that at the end of this, we are going to talk about our third session, which will be a session that is actually a design workshop. If you are still struggling with that, please submit to that design workshop. You can start on that process and we will be happy to give you some direct feedback on your plans.
As we mentioned before, that 400 square foot minimum of contributed area for the rain garden program. So that would be the size of your roof or your driveway, or 400 square feet for the native planting zone would be the converted area. And again, that 50% native plants, and we really strongly recommend you do as much native plants as possible, even 100%. But if you want to put 1 or 2 in that you just think would look really nice, that's fine. It is your yard. Where to place the rain garden. So first of all, you need to put it in a spot that's big enough. So again, you're using that chart to figure out how big the rain garden needs to be. So obviously you need to put it in a spot that can handle that size. We do want ideally dry or well-drained soils. As David had mentioned, we get a lot of people that get really excited about doing a rain garden. They're like, I have a perfect spot for it. There's a spot in my yard that's never dry. Let's put it there. And I can understand the appeal of that, but it's kind of the contrary of what we're hoping for with a rain garden, is we want those native soils to at least infiltrate a little bit. That being said, if there's just no better place to put it, sometimes we can work with a little bit more challenging sites, and there's some tricks that we have to make gardens that might struggle under normal situations work. So mostly level is ideal. If there is a bit of a grade, you can see this garden on the bottom. There's probably like a 8% grade from the top of her house down to the street. And so we put in what's called a terraced rain garden. So there's actually two cells, the upper cell and then the lower cell. And so that kind of makes a cascading stepping effect. So that's one way to deal with areas that are not very level. And then clean access lines from the downspouts. So you need to be able to dig a trench from your downspout to your rain garden. If you are struggling because you have a walkway between your rain garden and your downspout, there are some tools that we can recommend. We do these installations all the time. We use a cool tool called a sidewalk sleever. It's just a great big piece of iron, and you just slip a piece of pipe over it and dig a trench, and then use a sledgehammer to pound it underneath the walkway. So then you don't have to do any cutting or breaking of the concrete. We mentioned the offsets earlier. Again, want to be 50 feet from slopes, outside of the tree crowns, 10 feet from buildings. I will say, if you're slab on grade and you don't have a crawl space or a basement or footings, you just have a slab like next to a garage, you can go as close as 5 feet. And then again, 5 feet from utilities, just because there's that 5 foot give from when they mark the utilities. I highly recommend before anybody starts this that they go call 811. And actually, I don't recommend, I think it's required under the program that you call 811 and figure out where your utilities are before you start doing any work out there. Because even if you think you know where your utilities are, you may be in for a surprise. So just call 811. It's a pretty simple service. They'll have you go out there and mark it with some type of white paint or something, so they know where to mark, and then they just come out. They send somebody else. It doesn't cost you anything, and they mark where those utilities are located. Here's a basic plan set that shows where some of these, what some of these offsets are. So again, from the house, about 10 feet. You can see that garage, which is slab on grade, so 5 feet. You see the existing utility line, you want to be 5 feet off of that. So if you are drawing up a plan, it's usually a good idea to draw these offsets out on the plan. So then you have a picture of what space is available to put your rain garden in. All right, so building the rain garden. So before you do anything, you want to have utilities located a second time. So this part is really important. You want to do utility locate once when you're doing the planning, and then right before you're digging, you have to call those utilities in again, and that's for a different reason. The second one is in case you do accidentally hit a utility line. If you didn't have the utilities called in, you're in trouble. You are liable if you hit a utility line and you didn't call 811 2 weeks before you did the work. But if you call it in, they come out and mark it, and the utility is just in the wrong spot and you accidentally hit it, then you're not on the line, and you're not on the hook for that liability. So yeah, this is a really important thing to do before you start doing any digging.
And if you come to us for help and ask any questions about this, especially with design, excavation, anything, this is pretty much going to be the first question that we asked, is where does 811 say the utilities are? And I'm just going to let you know, we will essentially not be able to help you with any kind of design stuff if there isn't an 811 call to where the utilities are located.
Next thing you want to do after you have the rain garden designed is just go lay it out. So piece of rope, hose, flagging, something like that, so that you kind of get a picture in your mind of what the outline of the thing is going to look like, and make sure that it looks like what you want it to look like, and that it fits the space well. And you may need to do some adjusting when you're out there. We had talked about the downspout inlets. This is pretty important part. Make sure this gets done right. You can see here, they were creative with how they did their inlet, and they made it decorative. So you can actually see the trench because they dug in order to put the pipe in, but they just covered it in rock. And that's just an aesthetic thing, but I think it looks really nice because it kind of reminds you of what path the water is taking. And then you can kind of see where the pipe outlets there at the bottom. And again, we put that rock in to keep that mulch and that soil from washing away when we get a good rain event. This is one side of that rain garden that I showed you guys in the first presentation. There's the other side of that. The overflow, again, needs to go into your yard somewhere. So find the low spot in that rain garden. You may need to massage the low spot a little bit. So if you need to put like a berm on the downstream edge to make sure that that water doesn't run towards your house or to a spot that's sensitive, you might need to do a little bit of contouring with the soil to make sure that it's going to the right spot. And then we want some kind of rock pad there that spreads the water out into your yard. All right, so talking about mulch, I'm actually incredibly picky about the type of mulch that I use. I think it might actually be one of the most important parts of the entire garden, because it will ensure, if you do it right, it will ensure that the garden functions low maintenance and really well for a long time. But if you put the wrong product in, it can mess the whole thing up. So we want the mulch to be coarse and woody. Really, ideally 100% wood is what we're looking for. If it can just be mostly wood, that seems to work best. Like I said, it's designed to keep the weeds down, the moisture in. No bark, no beauty bark is really important. So beauty bark has a number of problems with it. The biggest one is that it has a lot of really, really fine particles in it. And those particles will work their way down into that soil that you put in, the bioretention soil, and they'll plug it up. So it won't be able to drain as fast as it's supposed to. The other issue with beauty bark is it's actually it's a fire hazard. Because the way the bark is processed, it's really, really airy. It's kind of like a paper towel. And if you use a coarse woody mulch, it's a lot denser and it makes a mat and it holds moisture a lot better than a bark does. So I've talked to firefighters and they've had some fairly nightmarish stories about people that use beauty bark and accidentally dropped a cigarette butt or something down and it spread underground. So I like to try to have people avoid beauty bark as much as possible. Again, mulch product that doesn't have very many fines in it. The key is we actually don't want to use things like compost as mulch in a rain garden. Oftentimes people use compost as a top dressing in areas with really poor soil to add some nutrients to the soil, but this bioretention mix is so rich, wow, that's not a factor for us. In fact, we want the top layer to be as nutrient shallow as possible. So we don't want there to be a lot of nutrients for weeds to take advantage of. So yeah, not using compost ideally, because you'll just end up spending all your time weeding. And no synthetic mulches and no mulch that's been dyed. We really want this to be natural as possible. This is the product that we use in all of our rain gardens when we design it. It's got a really weird name. It's called Animal Friendly Hog Fuel. There's a long story behind the name on that, but basically it's just a screened, shredded wood. So it's not chips. Chips can be a little bit problematic because they don't stick to each other. So when you get a rain, all the chips will kind of float in the middle of that ponding area. This is a shredded material and it kind of sticks to itself like Velcro. So you just don't get a lot of pieces moving around or floating or going from one end to the other. During the first rain event, you might get a little bit of movement, but after it gets wet, it just kind of sticks to itself. And then you don't have that problem with mulch drifting all over the place. It works really, really well. We recommend that people put down at least 3 inches of this stuff. Thicker is usually better, but you don't want to go too thick if you're putting in small plants, because you want to make sure you can plant the plants into the soil and not into the mulch. But I'm a firm believer in this product. I use it all over the place on my property. It's really inexpensive. I think it's about, if you buy it on site, it's about $14 a yard, and it's about $21 delivered a yard. It's one of my favorite products, and it's really changed the way that we do rain gardens to make them much less maintenance intensive. So again, the first thing you're going to do when you dig a rain garden is dig a hole. The most important part of this is making sure that that bottom area is correct. So we want that bottom to be nice and level, ideally level from one end to the other, so that all the water will infiltrate at the same rate along the bottom. We also need to be really careful that we don't compact that bottom area as we're digging it. We like to use heavy machinery to do this just because it makes it faster. But usually what we do is we dig the whole thing out, we rough it out with heavy machinery, and then afterwards we get into the bottom with pickaxes and stuff and loosen the stuff up as much as possible, because we really want that water to be going down into the native soil, and we don't want to create any kind of restrictive layer. So making sure that the dirt is really nice and light and fluffy on the bottom before we put that bioretention mix back in is really important. And that you don't spend too much time jumping into the garden and walking around. And we really don't want you to put heavy machinery into the bottom of the rain garden once it's been dug out. That's kind of a big no-no. So someone had asked what to do with the excavated soils once you've dug it out. If you don't do enough planting on this can cost you a lot more to do the rain garden. Sometimes tipping fees and hauling fees can be as much as $50 a yard, which is more than you're going to pay to bring in the bioretention soil. But if you do a little pre-planting, it's actually not very difficult to figure out things that you can do with the soil. So one thing is you can build a berm around your rain garden. This can help you manage what direction the water goes. It adds a little bit of contouring and texture. I will note that it's very unlikely you're going to be able to use all of the soil that you pull out of the rain garden on your berm. Most rain gardens are looking at between 15 and 20 yards of soil excavated, which is a lot. We've had people that insisted that they keep the soil despite our recommendation that they don't. And then they were a little bit shocked because they had this great big mountain of dirt on their property. That was a lot bigger than they thought it was going to be. Yeah, there's all kinds of on-site uses. Most of the time, like I said, we end up going to Craigslist and finding people locally that want free soil. I don't think I've ever been involved in one of our rain gardens where we couldn't find a good dump location, because there's always somebody, usually within 10 to 15 miles, that's willing to, that really wants the soil. So you may have to rent a dump trailer like you see here behind the truck. Those are nice because they have a dump function, so you don't have to unload them manually. And so if you can rent a truck and trailer, you can probably rent a truck and trailer for $250 a day. You should be able to do most of these projects in a couple of days. And that'll save you a lot of time in the long run.
And it's worth noting as well, once you do put up a Craigslist ad and say, I want to dump within 1 mile or something like that, be firm on that.
Yeah.
Derek and I have a number of stories where people try to get us to haul stuff to Anacortes, or yeah, just really hold your line. Say, no, I'm going to give it, I'm going to give as much as I can to one person, so I'm not making multiple trips. I'm not traveling more than 6 miles. Things like that. There are people out there, you just may have to sift through some unreasonable requests.
Yeah, be confident in your product. I know it feels like you're just trying to get rid of a bunch of dirt, but it's amazing how many people will fight and scrap to get that dirt from you. Again, this is what that rain garden backfill looks like. This is you didn't notice how dark that soil is. It's really just nice stuff. It's fun to work with because you can make all kinds of contoured shapes if you want. You can see this one on the left. You can make nice little hills. You can make berms. You can rake it out. It's kind of almost like working in a bunker at a golf course. It's almost that type of sand. You can make pretty much any shape that you want. And keep in mind, if it looks a little weird or off when you first put it down, that you're going to cover the whole thing in mulch too. So that'll even out a lot of some of the weird edges that you might have. But have fun doing contours and try not to make this thing just a great big box. There's really an opportunity here to do some fun work with curves and make your yard really pop. So we mentioned the rain garden berm, and this is just, we usually use native soil around the perimeter. We do this for a number of reasons. One is if we are in a bit of a slope, we want the rain garden to be basically the same elevation all the way around the perimeter. So we might have to raise one end up a little bit. We will cut a low spot through this berm for the overflow. So that's what the thing that you need to keep in mind for where do you want that water to go if the garden does get full. And we're going to get into planting zones in a bit, but basically zone 3 means areas with plants that prefer drier conditions. And because this is going to be elevated above the water, you want to put in plants that are going to do better in drier conditions. usually about 6 to 12 inches tall, and we want them to usually to be a lot broader than they are tall. So don't make a wall looking thing. Make it, 4 to 6 feet wide and then 6 to 12 inches tall. So it's a nice curve, nice curvy transition, and maybe even vary the height a little bit here and there so that it doesn't look like just a consistent thing all the way around, but it's got some variation in width. It'll look a lot nicer in the long run. Here's another example of them building a berm at the bottom edge of a rain garden. The other thing it serves for is if you are putting it in a spot that might be closer to a sidewalk, is it makes a nice visual buffer so that people are less likely to just kind of wander into it. It's a little bit of a rise that they're less likely to just stumble into. All right, David, you are going to go into plants. So why don't you take it from here, and then
I am going to go into plants. So we're going to cover just a few things within the plant section of the handbook. I'm going to tell you the types of plants you're looking for. I'm going to give you a little bit of how to read the handbook, and you're going to get a lot of just kind of my commentary on that section. Derek's probably installed about 300 of these. I've probably only installed about 200. But I've been doing these for a while, and I've made some mistakes that hopefully you all can benefit from. So the types of plants that you're looking for are both flood and drought tolerant. That seems a little bit strange because we're talking about rain gardens, so why wouldn't they just be flood tolerant? The idea is that you will not need to water these, and the rain gardens are not going to be wet year round. They are going to be bone dry in the middle of summer, and during winter they are going to be very, very inundated consistently. So you want plants that can handle being flooded, or as we sometimes say, having their feet wet, but you also want ones that can really handle not having any water at all. Grasses are really easy. They're resilient, they're inexpensive. They can handle a lot of water. They can also handle a lot of pollutants. If you are noticing that other more sensitive plants are dying off, consider replacing them at least temporarily with grasses. You also want to look for clumping varieties. Several plants within the rain garden handbook are actually not great for rain gardens because they are spreading or creeping varieties, and they get very big very quickly. Flowers, annuals or perennials. Note that if they are perennials, they will help the function of the garden more. But some people really like annuals, and that is also totally fine. The type that you want to look is water loving with drained soils. Well-drained soils mean that there's not often a lot of standing water. The water drains fairly quickly. That usually means water loving with drained soils is kind of code for wet in the winter, dry in the summer. If you are going to install any shrubs, go with the dwarf varieties. That soil that Derek was just talking about, how great it is, shrubs really take off in that. Plants tend to get enormous, and sometimes they can get far too big. The alternative to that, if there is not a shrub variety for something that you really love, plant it in zone 3. Keep it, just so it can kind of touch into that soil, but it's more just going to be a part of the garden, not necessarily in that soil. And then there's a number of great ground covers. What you primarily want in ground covers is fast growing, hardy ground covers. Kinnikinick, large leaf avens, wild ginger, salal is a maybe. I put salal on here, but salal is only a maybe because salal can form thickets very quickly. Blue-eyed grass, yes. Pearly everlasting, yes. You want them to grow in quickly and to reduce your maintenance costs and efforts. So here's another diagram from the book showing kind of zone 1, zone 2, and zone 3. What's important to note is that zone 2 is a slope, where zone 1 is relatively flat and zone 3 is relatively flat. Zone 2 is actually a hump. So where zone 2 ends and zone 3 begins is usually around the crest of that hump. So when you are planting, think, hey, if this thing is facing inwards towards the garden, is it zone 2? Is it okay to be a little bit more wet? Is it okay to have be kind of closer into that soil versus Does it like to have drier? Does it like to, not necessarily have its feet in that rain garden mix? That would go in zone 3. So here's some example plants. These are just some that I like, but I'm going to use it to kind of show you how to read this manual. So it has the name, usually goes by the botanical name in italics with a common name underneath. I strongly recommend you learning the botanical name and not relying on the common name. The common name is very, very deep. Not everyone calls it by the same name. For instance, dwarf red twig dogwood is also called red twig shrub, red berry shrub, even though it doesn't have berries, and red osier dogwood. But if you say Cornicerecia kelsey, every nursery is going to know exactly what you're talking about. It shows the zone that it is suitable for. This can or cannot be true. It's usually true. Sometimes it's a little bit off. The ones that I picked here, these are accurate. It also tells you if it is evergreen or deciduous. That's the E or the D. Deciduous means that it loses its leaves. Evergreen means that it does not lose its leaves. It's maintained its growth form throughout the year. A leaf shows native. If it is not a native, then it is what we call either a cultivar or a nativar, which are native adapted cultivars. The sun image is sun or shade. There are some that prefer full sun, like if the Rudbeckia, the black-eyed Susan down there, the yellow flowers, they only want full sun. They always want to be in sun. Versus the lady fern, the Ethereum felix femina, prefers partial sun, which is that kind of like setting sun, or the cloudy is shade. You'll usually get 2 of those. Very few things are pure full sun or pure shade. They're usually partial shade to sun because plants are what we call plastic. It gives you the size of both the height and the width. Height comes first. So you'll see, again, going back to the Cornicerecia, the red twig dogwood there, about 1.5 to 3 feet, and about tall and about 3 feet wide. It will also say things like spreading, meaning that it is going to sort of essentially come up in a central column and then go out. So that means that the top will likely be a little bit larger than the base. It also tells you the bloom, May to June, June to October. Again, not necessarily critical unless you're really trying to dial in when you're trying to coordinate color. You're trying to dial in when that evapotranspiration will be happening. And then it gives you some notes that are just essentially just sort of personal opinions. So I hope that demystifies that somewhat.
On the size, again, because the soil is so rich, these plants are probably going to get bigger than what the size says. So go to the extreme large size if there's a range, and then assume maybe 20%, 20-25% bigger than that, just because the plants really do get aggressive sometimes.
And that is mostly true for the shrubs and the grasses. A number of like flowers, they're fairly limited in terms of their size. So you can rely on that. But like the Cornicerecia, I don't think I've ever seen a Cornicerecia, even a kelsey in a rain garden that was smaller than about 2.5 feet. They get very big very quickly. I mean, very quickly. So here's some example gardens. This shows sort of the inflow, outflow, or overflow, and gives you kind of an idea of how you want to plant this. So you'll notice that the larger plants, any of the trees or shrubs, are all on the outside in zone 2 or maybe zone 3, while primarily emergence and grasses are down in zone 1. That's kind of a general rule of thumb. Is if you want grasses, put them in zone 1. If you want shrubs, put them in zone 3. If you want emergence like flowers or forbs, put them in zone 2 and 3. Yeah, avoid planting non-dwarf shrubs, avoid creeping or spreading grasses. Do not put trees in zone 1 or 2. I'm not even going to say avoid, just don't do it. I made a decent living for a while going in and fixing rain gardens that had trees in zone 1 or 2. Also, do not put edible plants in zone 1 or 2. That's less for safety. There's some concerns or some questions about whether or not you can eat edible plants that are planted in rain gardens. There's not really a strong yes or no. It depends on a lot of different things. But if you put edible plants in zone 1, that means that you are going to need to be going into zone 1 to harvest them. And remember, we don't want you to step on this soil as much as possible. And try to avoid plants that reproduce vegetatively. These are also called creeping plants or plants that expand by roots. For example, blackberries, Himalayan blackberries, expand vegetatively. We want to avoid that because they will take off in this soil, and it will be very difficult to keep them from not just taking over. So once again, talking about native vegetation landscaping, here's a handy little diagram that we got from the city, showing you about what we want you to do. If you dig down through the loose soil, about 8 inches, and then another 4 inches or so, we want you to fracture that subsoil. Basically, that just means scrape it. If you need to put the shovel in there and turn it up, do whatever you need to do to just kind of loosen up to try to stop that compaction, and then mulch over the top of it after you put down the amendment. There's, I believe in the next slide here, if I am, I'm sorry. Yes, so we're going to talk a little bit about bare rooting. So again, talking about why natives work, root form, adaptation, co-benefits for wildlife, root structure, water infiltrate, native good. And I believe, Derek, you can go ahead and skip ahead. So yeah, so the first step, removing existing vegetation, go to qualifying area, whatever was determined as qualified area, and start to pull out whatever is there. So if it is lawn replacement, you can do this in a few different ways. Somebody asked me earlier about removing lawn. Turf grass is a wimp. It will die very quickly. If you need something to use those Amazon boxes for, you can sheet mulch it and it will die very fast, and then you can dig it back up. Pull all, yeah, you see in that picture on the left there, a great example of sheet mulching. Just make sure it's overlapping. Give that a little bit of time. You know, there's not really an optimum time to do it. A lot of people ask me that. A number of folks will swear that doing it in a short organ grape native, yes it is, K. Browlett. A lot of people will swear by doing it in the summer. That works. It's very easy to do. Just go ahead, put it down, and dig up the rest of it to let the grass die off. You do want to still pull it out though. So sod removal is another thing to do. You can use an actual sod remover or which is a machine that you can rent, or you can dig it up by hand. There's a number of different tools to help you dig up sod. Sod grass, the roots go very, very shallow, so it's not difficult to dig out. You can do it with it. If you have a small enough area, you can do it with a pickaxe too. Invasive removal, we want you to do this mechanically. We don't want you to spray anything down to try to kill stuff out. We want you to actually go out and dig this stuff up. Both the King County Noxious Weed Board and the State Noxious Weed Board have great resources for how to remove different invasive species. It really is a species by species approach. There's not a one size fit all besides just digging them up by the roots. Hardscape removal, cut and chip, dumpster, haul away. This is pretty straightforward. You smash it out or cut it in some way. If you are going to smash it out, you absolutely have to wear ear and eye protection. I would also wear face protection. As someone who's lost a couple pairs of glasses doing this stuff, that's not really a suggestion. That's an absolute must. You can dumpster or haul it away. Again, if you have a dump trailer, you can just toss the stuff in your dump trailer and haul it somewhere to actually get it dumped. You can also, if you're going to be doing a number of renovations, you can get a whole dumpster delivered and toss it out with that. Dumping the stuff will be somewhat expensive, but you shouldn't be doing a ton of it, so it should be fairly easy. Do not use concrete chips as backfill. This is something that I see done a lot. I think it is a terrible idea. I think most of the time that I see it was sometime around the 60s or 70s. Let's leave this one in the past. Do not use this stuff as backfill for anything that you do. It's unstable. It messes with the soil. It's just not a good idea.
It's a really significant pH issue.
It's
So
it's an enormous pH issue. And it
the
will,
pH of concrete is quite high, and it will definitely alter the soil.
yeah, if you're going to end up basically amending your soil whether you want to or not if you have to do that. And more than that, if you're using it for any kind of structure, you're trying to build something on top of it, it's horribly unstable. And when you inevitably have to go back and dig this section up later, it poses a massive safety issue as you're suddenly coming across concrete. I cannot stress enough, do not use this stuff for backfilling. Tilling. So there's a number of different ways to do it. Rototilling machine is inexpensive way to just drive stuff over, rototill down 8 inches. You can set the blades as deep as you want to go. Those machines are a pretty good workout. It's an easy way to do it. There are also rototilling hand tools. It's not actually a machine. It's basically just like a big fork. You stick in the ground and twist back and forth. Great core workout. If you're the kind of person who's like, I have been bored in quarantine and I need to get, I want to get me some 6-pack abs, grab yourself a rototilling hand tool and just go to town. Again, depending on the size you're working with. If you're trying to do this on like a 400 square foot area, I suggest just renting a rototiller. I think it's like 175, $200 for half a day. But if it's a small enough area, rototill hand tools, probably about 30, $40. Amending and mulching, again, you're amending to 4 inches using compost. You can get compost from a lot of different places. There are material yards that you can order it. You can have it delivered. I strongly recommend knowing what is in your compost and where it is coming from. If you would like to make your own compost, I think that's something to talk to Christy about. If your neighbors have a compost and they want to give you some, you can talk to Christy about that as well. In general, you want to know the origins. You want to know what's in it. Sometimes compost have seeds in them, and that can end up being counterproductive.
One thing that does come up often is people ask if they can make their own bioretention soil.
You cannot.
By adding compost to their existing soil, and we really recommend people not do that.
Yeah.
It's very difficult to save any money, and you're usually going to spend a lot of time trying to get the mix right, and it's probably just never going to work as well as if you just purchase it. So I'm usually all for people doing things themselves, but when it comes to bioretention soil, it's not worth making your own. Just purchase it.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. No notes. I agree with that wholeheartedly. Mulching 3 to 4 inches. Oh, Derek, can you back up one for me? So mulching 3 to 4 inches. So hogs fuel, like we talked about, no dyes or synthetics. Someone asked me about arborist chips and where to find arborist chips. Now, there is a website called Chip Drop, and this website does a great job of offering to basically dump wood chips at your home for you to use. This is a very, very good resource, but you need to be specific in what you're asking for. You can sign up for it, but there's a box on there, I still believe, that says driver must contact me before dumping. Now, this is a good deal for them, and they want to do this because they have to pay to dump this stuff. So by dumping it at your place, it is going to be better. The first thing you want to ask is how much they're actually dumping, because they want to get rid of all of it in one go. And if they have like 16 yards of it, that may be way more than you actually need. The second thing you want to ask is what shape it's in. Do they have rounds? Do they have branches? Or is it straight chips? A lot of times they will dump rounds along with chips. That is, if you're looking for firewood, that's great. But if you're not, then suddenly you have all these big tree rounds that you're not certain what to do with. The last thing you want to ask is what they brought down with it. If they have chipped things like holly or laurel, you want to give that a pass, because laurel wood contains arsenic. It will be difficult for plants to grow, and holly often includes seeds or berries, which means that you could end up having to rip out holly starts for the next decade or so. So again, great resource. You just need to be specific with what you're asking for. Okay, so planting, 50% natives. Mulching, if you don't know what a mulching is, When you plant something in the ground, you want to basically put a ring of mulch around it, not up to the root, but a little bit back from the root so that it's continuing to nutrify the soils. But you want to have the root crown of the plant exposed. Roots need oxygen just like everything else, and that will help your plants establish and survive. You want to try to plant either very early in the spring or in the fall. Your ideal window is between about November and February. That is because most plants are dormant during that time. It is also raining and cold and helps them establish.
One thing we haven't mentioned yet is that when it comes to actually doing the rain garden construction, you want to do it in the summer. The soils that you backfill with as bioretention soils need to be placed dry. If they get placed wet, they just compact and they don't function as well. So really, ideally, you're building this sometime between June and September. I don't think that was brought up.
Yeah, correct. Just noting that these are not the same as rain garden plants. I'll say a quick word about bare rooting as well. Bare rooting means that you basically get all of the existing dirt. If you're getting plants in pots, you're getting all the existing dirt off before you put them into native soil. This is important because if you are planting plants that have very good high nutrient potting soil into relatively lower nutrient native soil, the roots will not expand beyond that potting soil. Plants are smart. They know how to go where the food is, and they will end up becoming what's called root bound, and they will die. So if you are planting into native soil, especially if your soil isn't necessarily great, have a bucket of water, take the plants out, shake off as much dirt as you can, dunk the roots in the water a couple times, and then plant them directly into the native soil. You're doing your plants the best they can to survive. That is not as important with rain gardens because rain garden soil is really good, so plants don't care as much. All right, let's talk a little bit about rain garden maintenance. Comes in 4 main varieties: watering, mulch, weeding, and drainage. Here's a quick overview, a little schedule of when you want to be doing these 4 different tasks. So you can see this is kind of a year-round thing, but each of these are very easy to do. So don't feel like you've just signed up for a part-time job. These are very quick activities. So watering, when you are first starting off, you want to be watering your plants. This is going to help them get established. It is going to help them grow and really kind of take over that role of being a high functioning plant. For the first summer, you do want to do it every 3 or 4 days. I think I've recommended closer to 2 to 3. After the second summer, once every couple weeks or so. The third summer, once a month, if at all. Usually after the first 2 summers, they're set to go. And remember, you're going to be planting these in the autumn and winter, so the rain does the watering for you. If it's raining, don't worry about watering. Mulching. So again, mulch goes on 3 inches deep. Very good. If you are coming back every 2, maybe 3 years, look for exposed spots. This mulch will break down. So look for exposed spots, look for areas that it's starting to choke plants out, move it around a little bit, determine if you need some. You don't need to scrape the old mulch off. All you need to do is to put new mulch on. So yeah, when you're going through your garden, you want to look at the inlets and outlets. Again, there's a lot of rock there, so it should make it easy to note. Here's where, like if there's a tree that's dropping a lot of leaves in there and then it's backing up, go ahead and pull those leaves out. If it looks like one of the pipes for the inlet is blocked, unblock that. That's as easy as it is. And then lastly, weeding. You will start weeding a little bit more and then gradually kind of taper off. That mulching will help keep the weeds down, and the plants getting larger and shading the weeds out will also help. Rain garden soil is very, very loose by design, so pulling the entire weed out is very easy to do. You primarily want to do this again in the summer when it's drier, because you don't want to compress the soils if possible. It will also make pulling the weeds out a lot easier.
2 questions, David.
Yeah.
What's the name of the bioretention soil and where can I get it?
Okay. The best, so it's called a number of things. It's called 60/40 RGM bioretention soil, rain garden soil mix, a lot of different things.
The safest thing to ask for is bioretention soil.
Correct. Yeah. And you can get it. The easiest place to get, the perfect engineered version of it is Cedar Grove. They actually engineered it with the Department of Ecology. It's kind of their mix. Why do I advise against, and from Grant, why do I advise against planting trees or tall shrubs in the rain gardens? They take over really, really quickly. And then if they get too root clogged, then the garden doesn't function. Actually, last year, we went in and pulled, sorry, not last year, year before, we went in and pulled a crab apple that had gotten into a rain garden. And the guy was having issues where his rain garden was constantly flooding his entire yard because the tree got into zone 1 and grew up so big and so fast that the water wasn't infiltrating. The tree had basically locked the rain garden off and was creating a flooding issue. It's just a very dangerous game to play. So estimating material amounts, nobody needs to try to memorize this. This is going to be given out to you. For square footage, soil is about 0.083 cubic yards. So let me take this differently. So for how much soil you have in square footage, you want to multiply that times 0.0833. That will give you cubic yards. So if you have, for instance, 400 square feet, you do 400 times 0.0883. That's how many square cubic yards. That's for estimating how much you need to dump. If you want to then figure out how much you need to bring back in, take that same number, the number that you used to dump, times 0.75 for bioretention. That's how much bioretention you want to bring back in. For mulch, take your same thing, square footage. So let's say 400 again, times 0.01. That gives you the total cubic yards for how many cubic yards of mulch you need to put back on your rain garden. For rock, square foot to a depth of 1 foot is 1 cubic foot, or 0.037 cubic yards. Rock usually comes in a cubic yards bag, so you can use that.
It's a cubic foot bag.
Cubic foot bag. Sorry, you're sorry. Wow, yeah, sorry. A cubic yard bag of rock would be horrendous. A cubic foot bag, so you can estimate about how many square feet you have, and then buy that many bags. Usually we say start with 10 bags and see how much more you need. 10 will usually do it because inflows and outflows are pretty uniform regardless of the size of the garden. There is a helpful calculator at the bottom of that last slide that gives you good conversions if you don't want to try to do this math. Again, this is just, this slide is essentially to let you guys know that this math exists, that it is not impossible to do, it's not magic, and you don't need to memorize this. Estimating plant size and spacing. So mature size, its growth habit. So how big it's going to be. We showed you where to find that in the manual. What its growth habit is, if it's spreading or not, whether it likes shade or sun. You also want to plant in layers. So there are some things that are going to grow up over the top. You are okay to plant things underneath them, especially if they like shade. As a general rule, plant sparse and wait for things to grow in. This garden here has a lot of different inlets and it looks very sparse. It looks very like, oh, really, that's all the plants? These plants will get enormous. So if you plant sparse and think, oh, this thing doesn't really look very good, give it a year, give it 2 years, and it'll grow in. It is much easier to add plants later than to take plants out. So budgeting, again, you do not need to memorize this. Excavation and soil dumping is about 30% or $30 per yard, plus however long it takes you to actually do the excavation or delivery. Bioretention soil is about $37 per yard. Mulch is about $22 per yard. River rock is about $8 per cubic foot or per bag. Piping is about $2 per line foot. Plants are about $2 per square foot. That's if you get them wholesale. And please note that all of these are approximate costs. Find a vendor near you. We can also help you locate a vendor. Find a vendor. They will give you accurate information. And of course, for plants, there are different ways to estimate how much it's going to cost for plants. So that is it for us. If that didn't scare you away, we have a design workshop on March 13th in a couple weeks, where we will be looking over your designs and helping you on the spot, one-on-one, where we can, with those actual designs. Both Derek and I will be there to help you. If you have questions about plants, you can come talk to me. If you've got questions about design and soils, you talk to Derek. It will be another session for us to really sit down and try to get into some of the nitty-gritty on this stuff. I'm going to turn it over to Christy for more questions on that. Thanks very much for attending.
Thank you, everybody.
Great, thank you so much, David and Derek. Before we let you go, we certainly want to open up the floor just to make sure if there's any last lingering questions out there that we get those answered. So go ahead and hit that Q&A button, or go ahead and raise your hand if you have a question as well. And hopefully Sarah can help me facilitate answering those questions from raised hands. For that upcoming workshop on 3/13, you'll note on the slide there is a little bit of homework, so I will send out the details in an email, but what we're looking for is you to send out a draft site plan. So you'll be emailing that in to me, and then you'll be getting feedback on that from David and Derek as well. And you'll get feedback during the course, but that will help to answer some site-specific questions. In the meantime, if you are interested in participating in the SoakItup program and you want to use this as an opportunity to help develop your application, please make sure that you schedule that initial site visit with me if I have not been to your property already, to make sure that you have an eligible location in your yard for the program. I'd love to come out and visit. Go ahead and send me an email. You can find that. I'll send it into the chat box in just a moment here. And you can also find it on the SoakItup website. And then last but not least, I will be sending out, along with information about the workshop, a request to fill out an evaluation for this workshop. We take this evaluation really seriously. We use it to help improve these workshops for future and to provide new programs that might help. This workshop actually came out of a previous evaluation itself. So please, it'll take about 5 to 10 minutes to fill out the evaluation. We'd really appreciate your feedback.
So questions, Bevan said, how do you sign up for the design workshop? I think you just said that you were going to send out a chat on that.
Yes,
right?
I will be sending out just after this. You'll see it in your inbox in about 10 minutes here, but I'll send out a link to the Eventbrite to register for that, along with the information about what you'll need to provide ahead of that workshop as well. And I see a note about the Rain Garden Handbook. In that email, I'll also have some of the resources that we discussed today that could help you, including a link to that Rain Garden Handbook. Whenever I come out to do a site visit for our shoreline properties, I do bring a copy of that handbook for you. It's a really useful tool. So you can get it in person from me during a site visit, or you can get it through that link.
You can also just, if you do a Google search for Rain Garden Handbook, it's the first link that comes up.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you, Derek.
If you want to be more specific, you can say the Western Washington Rain Garden Handbook, and it will bring you exactly that.
Very official name. Yeah, you'll definitely find it that way. I see a question here from Natasha asking, do we need to have a site visit before turning in the plan for the workshop? You do not need to have a site visit before turning in that plan, but you do run the risk of turning in a plan that might not be eligible for the SoakItup program. So I will help to, put my eyes on that and see it to make sure that it all works. But we do need to do that site visit, and the best way for me to determine if your property is eligible is to see your site. But I think a lot of questions can be answered. You can certainly plan out that rain garden document before the site visit if needed. All right, and then I see one last question from Jessica Sills. It says, I have a pretty wet property with a couple of seasonal ponds. Since a rain garden isn't a good option for that kind of property, how do I go about planting natives? Do I plant them around the edges of seasonally wet areas? Do I need to do any sort of excavation or amendment? So I will certainly let Snohomish Conservation District give their input, but I would just say that I do think that there's the potential that this area, if it's an existing grass area or an invasives area, is a really good potential for the native vegetation landscaping. There is that excavation, well, I'll say excavation, it's really the rototilling, so mixing up the soils to make them more water absorbent with compost and building in those natives to increase the soil capacity. And so that could be a good fit for that area.
Yeah, I would agree. I think the only thing I would mention is that you definitely can install directly into the wet area. It's just a matter of picking plants, and unfortunately, I don't have a great recommendation without knowing more about your site. Things like sun, shade, a lot of different elements in terms of size to give you like a good idea. But there are plants that will be able to handle being planted right in the middle as well as that.
Question here, how much does it cost to get rid of a concrete patio? I think it depends on how much of your own work you're willing to put into it. When we've done it in the past, we usually just rent an air hammer and then we have a dump trailer. And then we usually either just load it with wheelbarrows or load it by hand. If you want to get really fancy with it and rent an excavator and all that type of thing, that'll probably double the cost. But you can rent an air hammer and a dump trailer for probably $200 to $300 a day, and if it's relatively small, you can probably do it in a day. Can you, for Christy, you want to restate the eligibility?
Yeah, so for the rain garden, what makes the rain garden eligible? So shoreline property owner, residential, commercial, institutional, those are all fine. What we're looking for is really those setbacks that David and Derek went over. So we want to make sure that the rain garden is going to be outside the drip line of trees, so we're not hitting tree roots. We want to make sure that it's 10 feet from your foundation, and that we're not building over utility lines for that. And then we want to make sure it's at least, so the total, it needs to be 400 square feet. So that's the, again, the contributing area from your roof or hardscape. You can do combination projects. So you can do, say it's, if it's a smaller roof space, it's only 200 square feet. You could do native landscaping to combo that up to reach that 400 square foot minimum. And then what we're looking for is making sure that the infiltration rate is fine, that it's not too slow. You don't want to do it in a super pondy area. And then finally, the covenant is the only other eligibility requirement. You have to be willing to sign that maintenance covenant.
Can they use the rebate to install a cistern, or is it just a rain garden?
So that's a great question. It is, cisterns are not part of the program right now. So it's rain gardens or it's the native vegetation landscaping that we offer the rebate for.
And then is the 400 square feet minimum combined, that they have two sites, that adds up to that? How would you do that type of thing?
Yeah, thank you. Correct. So it's, you can do combinations. You could do native vegetation landscaping, multiple beds if you wanted. You could do multiple rain gardens, or you could do a combination of a rain garden and native vegetation beds.
All right, that's it. Last call. We got about 2 more minutes. Does anybody have any more questions? All right. Looks like
all right.
Yeah. We could spend 3 minutes talking about the origins of the term animal safe hogs fuel.
That's okay.
Maybe we'll say that for the 313 workshop. Well, we do hope to see you at the 313 workshop. So I guess just one more note on that. It is really geared towards people who are about ready to start planning their gardens and hoping to get those in the ground. It will be a bit more limited. It will be in terms of the number of attendees that we can host, because it will be answering very site-specific questions and providing a bit more help on these projects. So please, if you're interested and ready to go, do register. If you find that you're not going to be able to, if you do register and find you're not going to be ready for the course, then we do ask that you cancel your registration as well to allow space for others. Anytime you have questions about the SoakituP program, please reach out to me. I am here to be a resource to you. I'm so glad to have had David and Derek here to provide this excellent workshop to provide more knowledge. But if you run into any questions, I'm always here to help and help walk you through it. So thank you so much, everyone, and we hope to see you on the 13th. Thank you, David and Derek.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Christy, I snapped screenshots of all the questions.
You rock. Thank you so much, Sarah. I really appreciate that.
Yeah, there were 10 pictures. I'll send them all to you now.
Hey, Sarah,
Oh, awesome.
Sarah, you want to kill the recording?